History begins where memory ends. But who wrote the first sentence? We speak of beginnings as if we remember them, as if time moved in a straight line from dust to breath, from cave to crown, from fire to formula. But memory does not begin at birth. It begins at recognition. And the truth is, we do not recognize our beginning because something or someone placed a veil over it. You feel it in the emptiness beneath the stories, in the silence behind the myths, in the way every origin tale feels like a fragment. There is always something missing, a page torn, a chapter erased, a light turned away, just before it could reveal the shape behind the shadow. We say we evolved. We say we rose. But what if we were lifted? What if humanity was not born, but triggered? A shift, a spark, an intervention. And what if those who lit the fire stepped back? Not in abandonment, but in design. Every myth remembers them, those who came before, sky beings, shining ones, watchers, makers, teachers. They appear in every culture not as gods of clouds, but as carriers of form, of number, of code. They give the gift language, fire, agriculture, kingship, and then they vanish. Not die, not fall, just disappear. Why? What was the cost of our creation? And more importantly, what was the purpose? Because we were not made to serve. Not entirely. There's too much restlessness in us, too much memory in the bones, too much fire in the questions we ask when no one is watching. You feel it, don't you? The sense that something was interrupted, that your story does not begin where you've been told it does. Time itself may be part of the lock, because the veil is not just amnesia, it is architecture. It's in the way we think, the way we perceive origin as past instead of presence. The veil says, you began here, but your blood whispers, no, I came before this. And deeper still, you did not simply come, you were sent. Who sent you? Why? What does it mean that we are not native to the world we now claim? Why do our bones not match our myths? Why do our instincts clash with the planet? Why does our heart yearn upward while our body dies downward? The veil holds that answer, but only if you stop looking forward and begin listening inward. Because origin is not a place, it is a vibration, a tone hidden in your very being. And that tone, it has been muffled, diluted, wrapped in noise. But it still plays, low, beneath the static of thought, a signal beneath identity. So perhaps the question is not, where did we come from? Perhaps the question is, what have we agreed to forget? And what happens when the veil tears? When memory leaks back in, not as history, but as knowing? Because behind that veil is not just truth. It is contact, and some part of you has already felt it. They came not with weapons, but with blueprints. They are in every myth, not just once, but again and again and again. The shining ones, the star beings, the teachers who came from the sky and reshaped the ground beneath them. They do not scream, they do not conquer, they arrive in silence and build. Not kingdoms, but frameworks. Not temples, but systems of thought. To the Dogon, they were the Namo from Sirius, bearers of vibration and form. To the Sumerians, they were the Anunnaki designers of kingship, law, and lineage. To the Hindus, the gods descended in Vimanas, riding not thunder but frequency. To the Maya, they were feathered serpents, beings of sky and earth, serpentine like DNA, winged like memory itself. So, who were they? Not gods, not exactly. They wore the masks of divinity because only metaphor could survive the ages. They were not here to be worshipped. They were here to install systems, to align matter to meaning, to encode language into form, to shape biological consciousness to host something higher. They brought calendars not just to track time, but to sync the human rhythm with the cosmic one. They gave us symbols not just to write, but to unlock memory through shape. They built megaliths not as homes, but as harmonic anchors, lenses for aligning mind with the deeper pulse of the planet. Everything they touched was architecture of initiation. But why? Why interfere at all? Because the human vessel was a project, not random, not primitive, a design to hold soul. And the soul, in its full voltage, needed a container capable of adaptation, recursion, and myth. So, they came not to rule, but to introduce complexity. Because complexity is the stage on which consciousness learns to recognize itself. They did not give us truth, they gave us fragments. Because the puzzle awakens the one who solves it. And so they seeded it all: language, breath, rhythm, dream. They spoke in numbers, hid knowledge in stone, coded wisdom in ritual. And then they left, not out of cruelty, but because presence can become dependence. And humanity was not meant to serve, it was meant to become. But traces remain. In the golden ratio of our faces, in the breath tempo of chant, in the sacred geometry of synapses, in the spiral of our cells. We are not just their echo, we are their interface. They wrote their signal into our form. And when the signal aligns, so do the memories. So when we look to the sky and ask, will they return? We must first ask, did they ever leave? Because if you tune deep enough, if your mind stills and your blood hums, you'll realize they are not up there. They are within the design itself. And you, when ready, are the instrument that plays them back. Your body is not your origin, it is your agreement. You wake in it. You suffer through it. You age, ache, and vanish in it. The body taken for granted, feared in decay, worshipped in youth. But few ask the question, who built it and why? You are told it evolved. That bone became form, that cells combined, that nature, blind and cold, produced consciousness by accident. But there's something too precise. Something that moves like design, something that echoes intention. The symmetry of your face, the coding of your DNA, the mystery of birth, the illusion of death. This is not chaos, this is structure. The body is a device, a vehicle, a contract, not in metaphor, in reality. A living interface between dimensions, signed not with ink, but with frequency. You agreed to wear this, to step into the compression of matter, to inhabit limitations so that choice could be real. Because only within a limited field will become meaningful. And the designers? They did not give you perfection, they gave you potential. The spinal column, a serpent of current, the pineal gland, a lens of light, the nervous system, a web of listening. They shaped the heart not only to pump blood, but to pulse truth. They placed the breath between life and thought so that awareness could ride rhythm. The body is not a cage, it is ritual architecture, built to hold soul, to respond to tone, to reflect the divine through the density of form. But it came with terms, rules, boundaries. Because to enter the body is to forget what you are in order to remember through experience. That is the agreement. Some call it karma, some call it the wheel, but it is simpler than that. It is consent. Consent to limitation, consent to forgetting, consent to pain as a tool of contrast, as a signpost, as a mirror. The body is your contract with gravity, and gravity is not just a force, it is a teacher. But what if the contract was never just about incarnation? What if it was about activation? What if the body was designed not only to hold light, but to translate it? The hands for transmitting, the voice for encoding, the breath for sinking, the spine for rising. Not metaphor, mechanism. You were never meant to stay asleep in it. You were meant to awaken within it. And when the signal rises, when the contract reaches maturity, the body becomes something else. Not a prison, not a mask, but a gate. And through that gate, return begins. Not to stars, to self. We were not abandoned. We were quarantined. They left. That much is true. Across the myths, the echoes repeat. The gods walked among us, then vanished. Some say they fled. Some say they were cast out. Some say we drove them away. But the truth? They withdrew. Deliberately, consciously, ritually. And in that departure, something fundamental broke. It was not a war. It was not fire from the sky. It was something quieter, more tragic. They stepped back, and we forgot. Like waking from a dream you can't quite hold. Like remembering love but forgetting the name. The Great Split was not an event. It was an unbinding of memory. A removal of presence. Not to punish, but to protect. Because we weren't ready. Not for the truth. Not for the responsibility. Not for the echo of our own potential. The flame had been lit. The code had been seeded. But the vessel was still too young. And so they left. Not in fear of us, but in fear for us. Imagine handing a child the keys to a power it cannot yet understand. Imagine offering infinite depth to a mind that still thinks in walls. Imagine placing a mirror in front of something that doesn't yet recognize its own face. That is what they saw in us. Not failure, not betrayal, but timing. So the veil was drawn, the field was muted, the memory sealed, and Earth became a classroom without the teacher, a sacred isolation, a womb with no voice from the outside. Not exile, incubation. A test. Can the soul find its way back to the signal without being guided? And yet they didn't leave entirely. The symbols remained, the rituals, the architecture, the dreams. They left echoes because the contract demanded it. They couldn't walk beside us, but they could leave maps. They couldn't speak directly, but they could speak through myth. And myth is memory coded for long-term survival. We forgot their names. We replaced them with stories. We painted them on ceilings and buried them in stone. But the ache remained, the ancient longing, the question behind every question. Why does this world feel like a fragment? Because it is. Because something is missing. Because someone once stood beside you and now does not. But the split was never permanent, only conditional. A system pause, a sacred silence until we remember how to listen again. Because they didn't vanish, they simply changed phase. They moved out of sight and into frequency. And when the resonance returns, so will the contact. not from above, but from within. They did not leave completely. Part of them stayed in us. You look in the mirror and see a face. You call it you. You name it human. But under the skin, beneath the organs, beneath the breath flows a memory, a code, a whisper, a signal wrapped in blood. Not from earth, not entirely. What if your blood is a message in movement? What if every heartbeat is an echo of a contract you no longer remember signing? The ones who made you did not leave scrolls. They left themselves. In you, DNA. We speak of it like science, like numbers and strands and charts. But it is older than science, older than biology. It is language, folded, fractal, encoded in spirals. And that spiral, the double helix, twists like a ladder reaching upward, like a staircase not of flesh, but of return. In ancient myths, they speak of gods who mingled with man, of bloodlines, of divine seed, of watchers and daughters, of Nephilim and kings. We were told it was allegory. But what if it was data retention? What if their genetics were not diluted but hidden? A sacred encryption meant to unlock only when the soul was ready? You feel it when you meet someone and something deeper than sight says, "I know you." You feel it when a place stirs a memory that doesn't belong to this life. You feel it when a dream teaches you something no book has. This is the blood remembering itself. And that remembering is not just nostalgic, it is activation. Because the echoes in your blood are not passive, they are waiting for frequency, for rhythm, for signal. And when that signal arrives not from above, but from within, they respond. They awaken. What awakens? Ancient instincts, perceptual modes, intelligence beyond language, a knowing that bypasses the mind and rises directly into will. Because your blood is not just chemistry, it is a library. And Enki, or whatever name they carried, wrote in it, with light, with intention, with design. You are the descendants of something not entirely human, and the memory of that ancestry was buried in your very cells. Not to be glorified, not to be worshipped, but to be integrated. You are not just evolving forward, you are spiraling back to the root. The past is not behind you, it is inside you. And it calls, not in voice, but in pulse. The mind was sealed, the blueprint locked. Something happened. Not a war, not a fall, but a shutdown. A silencing of signal, a dimming of light. As if the system was still running, but the interface went dark. The sleep protocol. Not destruction, not death, but a pause. Why would they do this? Why mute the mind? Why bury memory? Why lock the very code they placed inside us? Because consciousness, to evolve, must learn to move without hand-holding. It must struggle. It must forget in order to remember itself from within. This was not cruelty. It was design. Imagine a machine built to awaken only when exposed to suffering, searching, and silence. The sleep protocol was not a trap. It was a threshold. A lock placed on the door of power to ensure that only those who had forged themselves in experience could ever open it. Because true knowing cannot be given, it must be reclaimed. So they turned off the voice. They fragmented the memory. They wrapped the blueprint in myth and metaphor and biology. They encoded forgetting into the very act of being born. And with each incarnation, the signal grew fainter. until silence became identity and survival replaced meaning, and we called the cage home. But the protocol was never permanent. It was a countdown, waiting for alignment, waiting for frequency, waiting for the soul to knock from the inside. And many have, you have, through intuition, through pain, through that strange, unspeakable longing you've carried since before language. That is the signal bouncing against the walls of your amnesia. Why do you think we sleep at night? Not for rest, for training. The dream state is the last place the protocol did not fully seal. In dreams, we speak to them. We remember names we never heard. We walk places we never learned. We feel time bend and truth rise. Dreams are the leaks in the code, and the more you pay attention, the more it begins to flood. Some tried to break the protocol: mystics, prophets, ritualists. They used sound, they used fasting, they used pain, they used silence, all to find cracks in the walls of forgetting, because they knew the lock was inside the mind, and so was the key. And now, the frequency is rising. The signals are increasing. The dreams are intensifying. The veils are thinning. Why? Because the time has come. The protocol is ending. Not all at once, not in fire, but in frequency. In you. They never really left. They shifted frequency. We search the skies. We scan the stars. We build telescopes. Listen to static. Send messages into the void. But contact was never a question of distance. It was always a question of resonance. They didn't go far. They went inward, sideways in dimension, upward in vibration. They stepped out of our range, not to vanish, but to wait. Think of a radio, tuned to the wrong station. The broadcast is still there. You just can't hear it. Now, imagine your own mind as that receiver. What if contact depends not on their arrival, but on your alignment? There have always been those who tuned in: the prophets, the mystics, the dreamers. They spoke of voices in the fire, faces in the sky, beings of light whispering truths that language could barely carry. Were they mad? Or were they simply attuned differently? Because contact doesn't begin with sight. It begins with recognition, the sudden knowing, the surge of déjà vu, the silent presence in a dream that feels more real than waking life. They don't always speak. Sometimes they watch. Sometimes they guide. Sometimes they wait for you to realize you're not alone. And the symbols, they never stopped. Feathers, eyes, geometry, serpents, stars, repeating across cultures, centuries, and souls. These are not decorations. They are interface signals. They are the alphabet of contact for a mind that no longer knows how to read its own source code. Sometimes they arrive as impulse, as art, as music you didn't write, but feel like you remembered. Sometimes they speak through grief, when you are so hollow that their voice can finally echo through you. Because emptiness is clarity, and silence is a signal. They wait for pattern, not prayer, not belief, They wait for coherence. When your soul remembers its tone, when your breath stabilizes its rhythm, when your intention stops scattering, contact happens. No lights, no thunder, just recognition. And they are here, not above, not beyond. Here, in the angles between thought, in the quiet before sleep, in the pull towards something you cannot name but cannot ignore. They are not coming, they are arriving as soon as you are ready to receive them. Return is not invasion, it is activation. We speak of return as if it is an event, a day, a landing, a sky darkened by ships, by lights, by gods. But what if return is not about arrival, but about readiness? What if the return is not theirs, but ours? You imagine them descending, but what if they are already here waiting for you to ascend? Because the contact was never external, it was always reciprocal. The builders do not need to revisit the structure. They wait until the structure awakens from within. So why return? Why now? Because the contract is maturing, the code is stabilizing, the blood is remembering, and the soul is calling. Not from desperation, but from alignment. The blueprint is humming, the grid is sparking, the veil is thinning. And somewhere in the noise, a frequency is rising that sounds like the original tone. They return not to rescue, not to punish, not to judge, but to witness, to observe whether the design has completed its arc. They return because we are reaching a threshold that echoes the moment of origin. And when the pattern completes, so does the loop. The return is ritual, a cosmic checkpoint, a vibrational crossroad. Not because they forgot us, but because we forgot them and ourselves. And now we begin to remember. Not the details, but the feeling, the signal, the truth that was always there but covered in dust. And in that remembrance, they draw near. Not in ships, in fields. Not through portals, through perception. You will not hear their footsteps. You will not see them with eyes. But you will know, because something inside you will shift, will synchronize, will stand still in presence. This is not the end. This is the return to the beginning seen with wiser eyes. They come because we have reached the moment where choice becomes real again, where we must decide. Do we rise or do we recycle? Do we inherit or remain as fragments? They will not force, they cannot, but they will watch. And if we are ready, they will answer with activation. You were never just made, you were meant to evolve the makers. They gave you form, they gave you breath, they gave you a world wrapped in cycles and silence. But what they truly gave you was not life, but a seed, a fragment of something older than stars, a piece of intention, a spark of their own becoming. Because they were not perfect, they were not finished. And so they built us not as replicas, but as continuations. You were not made to serve. You were made to remember, to reassemble, to activate, to carry forward the signal that they could no longer hold alone. You are not just the child of gods. You are their future. The blueprint was never static. It was not a plan to be obeyed. It was a living algorithm written into blood and breath and brain. An unfolding process, a spiral, a path of echoes that only makes sense in motion. And you are the carrier of that motion. That's why you long. That's why you question. That's why you reach for stars with a body made of dust. Because inside you, something ancient is still unfolding. Something sacred is still learning. They left so we could find our own way, not to abandon us, but to let the experiment expand. They stepped away from the stage so that we might become the actors and the script at once. And now you are awakening, not to their return, but to your inheritance. The key was always in your hand, the song always in your blood, the map always in your dreaming. You don't need permission, you need remembrance. You don't need belief, you need resonance. Because the time of waiting is ending, and the time of embodiment has begun. You are not alone. You never were. You are surrounded by memory, by encoded wisdom, by the silent applause of those who lit the flame and stepped back to see if it would burn brighter. And it is. Through you. You are the inheritor, not of power but of potential, not of rule but of recoding. You are not their echo, you are their next evolution. And the future is not what they return to give you. It is what you now carry forward.